It was a Saturday morning in September. The kind of morning where the light comes through the windows just right, making everything look softer than it really is. Mom had called me 3 times that week, asking me to come help clean out the basement. Dad had passed away 6 months earlier, heart attack, sudden, the way everyone says they want to go but nobody really does. "I can't do it alone anymore," she'd said on the phone, her voice small. "There's just too much of him down there." So there I was, in the basement of my childhood home in suburban Toronto, surrounded by boxes that smelled like dust and decades. Mom was upstairs making sandwiches. I could hear her humming, something she'd started doing after Dad died, like she needed to fill the silence he left behind. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. Just sorting. Keep, donate, throw away. The usual ritual of loss. That's when I found the silver box. It was tucked behind Dad's old golf clubs, the ones he never used but refused to throw away. The box was small, about the size of a hardcover book, with tarnished edges and a lock that had rusted open years ago. I'd never seen it before. Inside were photographs. The first few were normal. Dad as a young man, maybe 25, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. Dad with his arm around a woman who wasn't my mother. I smiled. An old girlfriend, probably. Everyone has a past. But then I saw the next photo. Dad holding a baby. The woman beside him, her hand on his shoulder, both of them looking at the camera with that exhausted, terrified, completely in love expression that new parents have. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, "Our girl. 3 days old." My hands started shaking. I was their only child. I was born in 1985. The date on this photo was 1979. "Sweetie, lunch is ready." Mom's voice drifted down the stairs. I shoved the photo in my pocket and closed the box like it had burned me. I didn't eat lunch. I told Mom I felt sick, which wasn't a lie, and drove home to my apartment in the city. The whole way, that photograph sat in my pocket like a stone. At home, I pulled it out and stared at it under my kitchen light. The baby in the photo looked like any baby. But the woman. I studied her face. Dark hair, kind eyes, a smile that didn't quite reach all the way. She looked happy but also sad, if that makes sense. Like someone trying very hard to hold onto a moment they knew wouldn't last. Who was she? And who was that baby? I did what anyone would do in 2024. I took a photo of the photograph and reverse image searched it. Nothing. I posted it on one of those genealogy forums with a vague caption, trying to identify people in old family photo. Any help would be appreciated. 3 hours later, someone messaged me. "I know who that is. We need to talk." The username was Justice for Jenny 1979. The profile was blank, created that same day. Every instinct told me this was crazy, that I should block this person and forget about it. Instead, I typed, "Who are you?" The response came immediately. "Someone who's been waiting 45 years for someone in your family to finally ask the right questions. Can you meet tomorrow? There's a coffee shop in Mississauga, corner of Burnhamthorpe and Mavis. 2 p.m. I'll be wearing a blue scarf." I stared at my phone. This was insane. This person could be anyone. A scammer. A lunatic. But I typed, "I'll be there." The woman wearing the blue scarf was in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She had the kind of face that had been beautiful once, and was still striking now. When I walked into the coffee shop, her eyes locked onto mine immediately, and something flickered across her face, recognition, maybe. Or grief. "You look like her," she said as I sat down. "Your sister." The word hit me like a physical thing. "I don't have a sister." "You did." She pulled out a worn envelope and slid it across the table. Her name was Jennifer. Jenny. She was 6 years old when she died. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. The woman's name was Diane. She'd been my father's neighbor back in 1979, when he lived in Vancouver with his first wife, a woman named Catherine. They'd had a daughter, Jenny. And in December of 1983, there'd been a fire. "Your father was supposed to be watching her," Diane said, her voice careful, like she was stepping around broken glass. "He'd fallen asleep on the couch. A space heater tipped over. By the time he woke up, the whole back of the house was in flames. I felt sick. He got her out," Diane continued. "Carried her out of that house himself. But the smoke, she died 2 days later in the hospital. Your father was devastated. Catherine couldn't even look at him. Catherine couldn't even look at him. And the marriage ended right there, in that hospital room. Why didn't anyone tell me?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "Because 6 months after Jenny died, your father moved across the country and changed everything. New city, new job, new life. He met your mother in Toronto. Started over. I don't think he ever told her about Jenny. About any of it." I pulled out the photograph. "Is this her?" "The woman in the photo." Diane nodded. "That's Catherine. Last I heard, she moved to Australia in the 90s. Melbourne, I think. Never remarried. Never had other children." She paused. "She told me once that losing Jenny meant losing the only family she'd ever have. I confronted my mother that night. I walked into her house without knocking, the photograph in my hand, and I asked her straight out, 'Did you know Dad had a daughter who died?' The color drained from her face. For a moment, I thought she might faint. 'Sit down,' she whispered. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast before school for 18 years, and my mother told me the truth. She'd known. Not at first though, because my dad had kept it secret for the first 2 years of their marriage. But one night, after too much wine at a company party, he'd broken down and told her everything. About Jenny. About the fire. About how he woke up every morning and remembered all over again that his daughter was dead because he'd fallen asleep. He made me promise never to tell you, Mom said, tears running down her face. He said he couldn't bear for you to know. Couldn't bear for you to look at him differently. So you just kept this from me. For 38 years. He was trying to protect you. Protect me. From what? I stood up, the chair scraping loud against the floor. From knowing I had a sister. From knowing my father was a real person who made mistakes. Mom's face crumpled. From knowing that he was terrified every single day that he'd fail you the same way he failed her. The words stopped me cold. Every time you were sick, Mom continued, her voice breaking, every time you went on a school trip, learned to drive, moved out on your own, he was terrified. He loved you so much it nearly destroyed him, because all he could think about was losing you. That's why he was so strict. So careful. So distant, I finished. She nodded. I thought about my father. How he'd never quite seemed comfortable with affection. How he'd check the smoke detectors obsessively, every month, even though Mom told him it was too much. How he'd call me every Sunday without fail, even if we had nothing to say, just to hear my voice and know I was okay. All this time, I'd thought he just didn't know how to love me. But maybe he'd loved me too much. In the most broken, terrified way possible. I couldn't sleep that night. Couldn't stop thinking about Jenny. About Catherine. About a whole part of my father's life that had been erased like it never existed. At 2 in the morning, I made a decision. I was going to find Catherine. It took me 3 weeks and the help of a genealogy service that cost more than I wanted to admit. But I found her. Catherine Walker, living in a suburb of Melbourne, working part-time at a bookstore. Unmarried. No children. I sent her a letter. An actual handwritten letter, because an email felt too cold for something like this. Dear Catherine. My name is Jasmine, I'm the daughter of David Walker. I recently learned about Jenny, and about you, and about everything my father kept hidden. I'm writing because I thought you should know that he passed away 6 months ago. I'm also writing because I have questions, and I think you're the only person who might have answers. If you're willing, I'd like to talk. 3 weeks later, I got a reply. A phone number. And 4 words, call me on Sunday. Catherine's voice was soft, with the faintest Australian accent woven through it. I didn't think I'd ever hear from anyone in David's family, she said. I didn't think he'd told anyone about us. He didn't, I said. I found a photograph. Started digging. There was a long pause. Then, what do you want to know? Everything. I wanted to know everything. So she told me. She told me about meeting Dad at a music festival in 1977. How he'd been funny and kind and so full of life. How they'd gotten married too young, too fast, but how it had felt right anyway. How Jenny had been a surprise, but a perfect one, with Dad's smile and Catherine's stubborn streak. She told me about the fire. About standing in that hospital hallway while doctors worked on Jenny, and how Dad had sobbed so hard he couldn't breathe, kept saying sorry, I'm so sorry until his voice gave out. She told me about the divorce. How it wasn't about blame, not really, but about the fact that every time they looked at each other, all they could see was what they'd lost. I don't hate him, Catherine said quietly. I never did. But I couldn't stay. And I couldn't have another child. It felt like a betrayal. Like I'd be trying to replace her. He had me, I said. Does that feel like a betrayal? Another long pause. No, she said finally. It feels like he got a second chance. I'm glad he took it. I'm glad he didn't let what happened to Jenny destroy the rest of his life. But it had, I thought. In ways. It had shaped every single choice he'd made as a father. Can I ask you something? Catherine said. Of course. Was he happy? With you and your mother? I thought about Dad. About Sunday phone calls and obsessively checked smoke detectors, and the way he'd hugged me at my college graduation, like he was afraid I'd disappear if he let go. Yeah, I said. I think he was. In his own way. Good? Her voice cracked slightly. That's good. After that first call, Catherine and I kept talking. Once a week, then twice. Small conversations at first, weather, work, safe things. But slowly, we started going deeper. She told me about Jenny. Really told me. About how she'd loved dinosaurs and refused to wear anything but purple for an entire year. How she'd been learning to read and would sound out every single sign she saw, even the boring ones. How she'd had Dad's laugh, this big, surprised sound that came from her whole belly. Hearing about Jenny made her real in a way the photograph never could. And then, 2 months after that first call, Catherine said something that changed everything again. "There's something I need to send you." A week later, a package arrived from Australia. Inside was a showbox, and inside the showbox were letters. Dozens of them. All addressed to Jenny, all written in my father's handwriting, all unsent. My hands trembled as I opened the first one. "Dear Jenny, you would have been 7 today. I wonder what you'd be like now. If you'd still love dinosaurs, or if you'd have moved on to something else. Horses, maybe. Or astronomy. You always loved looking at the stars." The letters went on for years. Birthdays, Christmases, random Tuesdays when he must have missed her so much he couldn't stand it. Some were a few sentences. Others were pages long. All of them were love letters to a daughter who would never read them. The last letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. "Dear Jenny, your sister is 38 now. The same age I was when I lost you. She's smart and strong and everything I hoped you'd be. I see you in her sometimes, in the way she laughs, in her stubbornness, in how fiercely she loves the people she cares about. I failed you. I know that. I've known it every day for 41 years. But I didn't fail her. And I think I hope that would make you happy. I'm tired, sweetheart. My heart isn't what it used to be. The doctors don't say it, but I can tell. And I'm not scared. Because wherever I'm going, maybe you'll be there. Maybe I'll finally get to tell you I'm sorry in person. I love you. I never stopped. Dad." I sat on my apartment floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. "You should come here," Catherine said during our next call. "To Melbourne. I want to show you something." I used my savings and booked a flight for November. Mom didn't understand at first why I needed to meet this woman, why it mattered so much. But eventually, she nodded. "Your father would be terrified," she said. "But I think he'd also be proud." Melbourne was beautiful. Warm and bright, the opposite of Toronto's November grey. Catherine picked me up from the airport, and seeing her in person was surreal. She looked like the woman in the photograph, just older. Softer. Sadder. She drove me to a cemetery on the edge of the city. Jenny's grave was simple. A small headstone with her name, her dates, and a carved dinosaur. Catherine laid flowers, purple ones, and stepped back. "I come here every week," she said. "And I have for 40 years. People think I'm crazy. Maybe I am. But it's the only place I still feel like her mother." I knelt down and touched the stone. "Hi, Jenny," I whispered. "I'm your sister. I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." Catherine's hand touched my shoulder, and we stood there together, 2 women connected by a man who'd loved us both, and by a little girl who'd died before I was born, but who'd shaped my entire life. That night, Catherine and I sat in her small apartment, drinking tea, and looking through photo albums I'd never known existed. "Why did you keep all of this?" I asked. "Didn't it hurt too much?" "Of course it hurt," she said. "But forgetting would hurt more." She was real. She existed. She mattered. And if I let go of these memories, then what's left of her? I understood that. More than I wanted to. "Can I tell you something?" Catherine said. "Something I've never told anyone." I nodded. "I almost called your father. Once. About 15 years ago. I found his number through a mutual friend and I just sat there with the phone in my hand for an hour. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to know if he still thought about her. About us." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was afraid he'd moved on. That he'd built a new life, and didn't want to be reminded of the old one. And I couldn't bear that." She looked at me. "But now I know he never forgot. Those letters, they mean everything to me. More than you could possibly understand." "He never forgot you either," I said. "Mom told me. He had nightmares about the fire for years. Would wake up screaming Jenny's name." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "I had the same nightmares. Still do sometimes." We sat in silence for a long time. Then she said, "Do you think you can forgive him for keeping this secret?" I'd been asking myself that question for months. "I don't know if there's anything to forgive," I said finally. "He was just broken. Trying his best with the pieces he had left." "We all are," Catherine said softly. "Aren't we?" I stayed in Melbourne for a week. Catherine and I visited Jenny's grave 3 more times. We talked about Dad, about the life he'd lived, about the different versions of him we'd each known. On my last day, Catherine gave me something. "Your father left this here," she said. "The day before he moved to Toronto. I found it on Jenny's grave after he'd gone. It was a small wooden dinosaur, hand-carved, slightly rough around the edges. Dad had made it himself. I want you to have it," Catherine said. "You're his daughter too. You deserve to carry a piece of her with you." I held that little dinosaur and felt the weight of everything, the sister I'd never known, the father I'd thought I understood, the secrets that had shaped us all. When I got home to Toronto, I put the dinosaur in the silver box, along with the photograph and Dad's letters. I put the box on my shelf where I could see it every day. Mom came over that evening. "How was it?" she asked. "Sad," I said. "And beautiful. And necessary." She nodded. We sat together on my couch, and for the first time since Dad died, we talked about him honestly. Not the perfect version we'd been trying to remember. The real one. Flawed and loving and haunted and trying his best. "Do you think he'd be upset?" I asked. "That I found out?" Mom considered this. "I think he'd be terrified. But I also think, deep down, he'd be relieved. He carried this alone for so long. Maybe now, through you, he doesn't have to anymore." 6 months later, Catherine flew to Toronto for what would have been Dad's 65th birthday. We stood at his grave together, me, Mom, and Catherine. 3 women who'd loved the same complicated man in different ways, at different times, for different reasons. "I brought something," Catherine said. She pulled out a letter, sealed in an envelope. "I wrote it to him. After you visited. I never sent it because, well, He was already gone. But I thought maybe you could leave it here, I finished. With him. She nodded. We buried the letter at the base of his headstone, next to the flowers Mom had brought. As we walked back to the car, Catherine slipped her hand into mine. On my other side, Mom did the same. We were an unlikely family. Built from tragedy and secrets and 45 years of silence. But we were a family nonetheless. That night, the three of us sat in my apartment and looked through all the photographs together. The ones from the silver box. The ones from Catherine's albums. The ones from Mom's collection. We put them together, creating a complete picture for the first time. Dad with Jenny. Dad with me. Dad with both of the women he'd loved. A whole life, finally visible. He was lucky, Catherine said softly. To be loved this much. By all of us. We were lucky too, I said. To have him. Even with all his secrets. Mom squeezed my hand. Do you really believe that? I looked at the photographs. At Jenny's smile. At Dad's younger face, full of hope and fear. At Catherine and Mom, two women who'd never met, but who'd both shaped who I was. Yeah, I said. I do. Because love isn't perfect. It's messy and complicated, and sometimes it comes wrapped in secrets that take 45 years to unravel. But it's real. And it matters. And in the end, it's the only thing that lasts. The silver box sits on my shelf now, no longer hidden. Inside are the letters, the photographs, the wooden dinosaur, and something new, a picture of the three of us at Dad's grave, holding hands, holding onto each other. A family built from loss. But a family nonetheless. And maybe that's what Dad was trying to tell me all along, in his silent, stubborn way. That love doesn't erase mistakes. It doesn't undo tragedy. It doesn't make the pain disappear. But it remains. Through fire and grief and 45 years of secrets. It remains.